Grazie tanto.
Okay, good evening everyone. My name is Federica Sabbati. I have many hats, although it doesn't look like it. But tonight I'm representing both the European movement, pro-European organization, and the Brussels. Is this better?
Yes.
And Brussels, no. Yes. And the Brussels branch of Europa, or Europa Party, which is an Italian pro-European party. Together with other organizations that are represented here, we have promoted this small event to start talking about an issue and an initiative that I think is very interesting, and that is an initiative that is aimed at bringing the citizenship active on some issues that are normally issues that we think are more academic than not, probably. So we're talking about the rule of law, of course, which is, those who study political science are used to think of it as one of the fundamentals of a liberal society, and for the rest, it's always something a little bit far away, and it's a concept that's a bit obscure. Actually, it's not obscure at all, and it has to do with lots of the freedoms and the rights that we enjoy, particularly in the European Union, and we are used to enjoying the European Union. But it's also something that is not an achievement in itself, but is a process that needs constant attention, constant maintenance, and I think tonight we will talk about, this evening we will talk about some of the examples, or at least one of the examples where we see that we need to pay a lot of attention to it, because even in the European Union we are not safe from breaches of the rule of law. And of course I'm talking about the Hungarian case. So I introduce you briefly the speakers that we have this evening. We have just about an hour and a half. I think what we want to do is hear from them their perspective on this issue, and I will introduce in a second all the three of them, and then obviously having a bit of a back and forth questions answered from yourselves. So let's keep it relatively easy and light as a discussion, as a conversation. So I have on my right Marco Cappato, who's also many hats. Also many hats. I will now mention a few. One is relevant for the office where we are right now at the moment, which is the ALDE party, which I thank for the hospitality. Marco used to be a member of the European Parliament from the ALDE group, actually the Liberal group in the European Parliament, and he's very well known in Italy and not only in Italy, for his battles as a human rights campaigner, actually, on many different battles. He's now starting as a promoter of this citizens' initiative on the rule of law, and with this hat, then we've invited him to discuss this with us and present it to us. I have here Balint. Now I will try my Hungarian. Hirvel? Yeah. Yeah, tried my best. Who's from the Hungarian opposition party Momentum, who's a member of the ALDE party. He's also the Secretary General of LIMEC, the youth organization of the Liberals, and we're very happy to have you and to tell us a little bit what's going on in Hungary at the moment and how this rule of law protection initiatives may actually be relevant, or very relevant even, also in the case of Hungary. I think that's very interesting and very actual. And then we have Federica Sabbati, a similar name as mine. For the first time, two Federica on the same panel, who is a representative, actually the director of the Human Rights Cities Network. And she will tell us a little bit more about this network, because I think it sounds very interesting, the work that you're doing to engage the citizenship on these issues. And you will present a little bit the more let's say theoretical side of what is a rule of law in Europe, and how the European law is actually protecting it at the moment. So maybe actually we'll start with you to give a little bit of the framework, and then we'll pass to Balint for the Hungarian case, so we go from the theory to immediately the practice, and then Marco to finish and present to us this initiative and his ideas about how to protect as a citizen, also how to engage as a citizen in these battles, which are battles that are relevant for all of our lives. We have one microphone, so I'll just pass it on to you. Frederic, thank you for being with us and for sharing your ideas.
Thank you very much. Do you think my voice is strong enough to allow me to talk without microphone?
Yes.
No.
It's a silence, yeah.
I would rather be more comfortable. So thank you, Federica, and thank you for inviting me. As Federica was saying, I will first start to give a kind of overview, a framework of what is the rule of law in the context of the EU, because as you all know, I mean, the purpose of the EU is to promote well-being and prosperity, but at the same time, the challenge is to defend the core value of the EU. And on that aspect, we have at the cornerstone of the European integration several aspects. We have peace, security, stability, democracy, and prosperity, which bring us directly to the core value of the European Union. And on the core value, of course, we find the rule of law. We have the Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union, which mentioned that a prerequisite for the member state to become a member of the European Union is, of course, to adhere and share this fundamental value. And those fundamental values are human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and the respect of human rights. So what does the rule of law mean exactly, and what is the commitment for member states to adhere to this principle? It means that every member state and all the public power needs to act under the law, constrained by the law, in accordance with the value of democracy and human rights, and they have to be controlled by independent and autonomous judiciary. So there are a couple of principles which are recognized by the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights, and those principles are the principle of legality, though everything needs to be put in the law and framed into the law, the legal certainty, so that could be anticipated and the law is known and everybody knows how to act on it. There is the prohibition of arbitrary exercise of the executive power, so everything needs to be according to the respect of the law, but also the human rights, and no arbitrary decision could take. Of course, impartiality of the court, independence and autonomous judiciary, the separation of power, that they know there is no interference from the executive into the legislative, and equality before the law. So what does it mean exactly? It means that we need to have independent and regulatory body. It means that the justice needs to be accessible to all the citizens, and the independence of the judiciary is also in line with the EU standards, which are related to the International Convention of Human Rights. There is also a strong aspect which is related to the fight against corruption, which means that we need to have transparent and accountable institutions. There is also the importance of the legal framework, which needs to be in accordance with the human rights principle, as I said, which concretely means that member states need to have, as for example, independent human rights institutions, and that the rights of the person are protected by institution and according to the law. So that's what it is about, rule of law. So the European Commission has put one of the more important elements, and we see it as well now in the new presidency of Finland. This is one of the very strong elements they've been putting in their politics. They really want to make sure that the rule of law is respected, and the Commission recently has also been promoting 3 key initiatives that I will talk a little bit further. So there is to protect the rule of law, there is a framework which has been put in place by the European Commission, which means that in case one of the member states have breach some of the rule of law principle, there is some mechanism that could be put in place. So the Commission can first make an assessment of the situation, then based on that, together with institutions like the Fundamental Rights Agency and the Commission, they could provide an opinion, and then recommendation is provided whether what is happening and what the states, if there is breach to the rule of law, what the state needs to be done. There is also a monitoring of the EU country which is foreseen and which needs to be followed up by the Commission recommendation. So that's the legal framework. and most important, related to the case of Hungary, I would say it's the Article 7, which is in case of the breach, a severe breach, serious breaches of the common value, the Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union allow, I mean, at certain condition, it needs to be either at the initiative of the Parliament, either the Commission, either 1/3 of the Member States, that sanctions are taken, so serious sanction, which means, as for example, the most important what would be that the suspension of the right of voting of the Member States and within the Council is taken away. So in case the Parliament, the Commission, 1/3 of the Member States is recommending that Article 7 needs to be applied, the European Council then can act in that sense. So I think
we are now at this point, I think.
we are at this point
with the case of both Hungary
yes,
and Poland,
Hungary
I think.
and Poland.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the discussion should be taking place in Council at the moment.
Yes.
And without involvement of Parliament, I think that's a separate battle. I'll take this one. Thanks, Federica, for the more theoretical framework. I think it's useful to come back to it than when he's...
Would you like me to talk about the importance of the human rights city right now or at the second stage? I think, yeah, just to frame it, and I think why the Human Rights City Network, it's a network of European cities which has committed themselves to use the human rights as, I would say, human rights and the human rights instrument are used as a guiding principle to govern a city. And this is one, and the other very important aspect is really to engage the citizen and to bring them on board, which means that the city is managed in terms of planning, designing, and implementation of every decision making in relation with the engagement of the citizen. So the main principle is really to make the citizen aware and understand what are their rights, how they are translated in their daily life, and help them to contribute to the management of the local authorities. So in that context, it's very important what's happening now, because if we look at the overarching framework of the EU, and we look at the role of the local government, what they could do to promote and implement human rights, it's essential. And in that context, if we look at the main initiative the Commission has been taken, because as I was saying, I think there is 3 milestones in the history of the EU which has been underlining the EU fundamental value, is the Charter of the Fundamental Rights, which was issued in 2000, and then there is the EU treaties and the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which has been legally binding since 2009, and very recently, on July 2019, the European Commission adopted a communication on the reinforcement of the rule of law. And in that context, as for example, there is a procedure which is foreseeing an annual monitoring cycle, which means that the rule of law is monitored by every member state, which leads to a report. And in that context, the role of local authorities is essential because they are directly there and could directly analyze what's happening on the ground. If there is freedom of expression, is the court independent, if people are informed about their rights, do they have access to justice? It's essential, and they could have a significant role to inform the citizen of the right, to inform them what is the rule of law, what does it mean, how is it translated locally on the ground, and to make them to be more active in the principle of accountability and transparency.
Thank you. That's interesting to, or I think I would be interested in knowing if that works at the moment in Hungary, if you have the feeling that that would work, if you have a local government of the same color as the national government, whether, in the already national government we are seeing some problems of attending to these principles, whether the local level would be much different. But maybe that's the second question to Balint, and the first one would be just to tell us a little bit of what's going on at the moment in Hungary and how that, if you perceive that initiatives of this kind could actually be helpful.
Hi, thank you for inviting me for this discussion. I'm happy to share here the view we have from Hungary, from Momentum, and the work we are doing for the past few years. Maybe first to react also on your presentations. When we talk about rule of law, it's actually a concept which is already really important before a country is joining the EU. So we have what we call the Copenhagen criteria, and those criteria are foreseeing that a country which is joining the EU has a certain level and is actually fulfilling criteria in the field of rule of law. So that's, I think, something really important to specify here. And once you are inside the union, that's where we are lacking mechanisms which are basically ensuring that you are still fulfilling those, complying and fulfilling those criteria. And that's something we can highlight here in the case of Hungary as well. Maybe the second point, which is also important in terms of rule of law, is that since we consider the EU as being an area of freedom, security, and justice, as it is in the treaties, this rule of law is really important. But beyond the fact that it's only about rights and how we respect this balance between justice, government, parliament, it's also about mutual trust between different countries. So if you cannot trust in the institutions, you cannot trust in the justice of the other countries. How do you ensure that basically it's working as a union? And how do you ensure that it's also working as a market, as an economy? So this has a broader impact than only rights. So this rule of law is really a key issue for the EU. So now on the situation in Hungary. So well, there are many things to say. I will try to keep it short. But basically, since 2010 and the government in place, composed by the majority of the Fidesz party, we saw a progressive decrease in terms of how democracy and rule of law are implemented in the country. Already starting in 2011 with the new fundamental law in Hungary adopted by the party in power, we could see that the independence of the judges, and you mentioned this is a fundamental point of the rule of law, was questioned. The system was reformed in a way that was good for the governing party, and starting from there were throughout the years many more reforms which brought a lot of questions and which undermined clearly democracy and rule of law. Maybe I would mention here that even the Prime Minister himself 3 years ago said that Hungary should follow the path of illiberal democracies and not liberal democracies. Without being too theoretical, that also impacts on how you see rule of law and how you want to implement rule of law itself. And he was taking Turkey and Russia as examples. So since this is happening in the EU, it's important to put this in perspective with what was said before and the criteria and how rule of law is implemented inside the union. So from there, the Hungarian situation, I would say there were what's important in terms of rule of law is maybe also the freedom of press, of media, of expression, which was highly undermined in the past years. So we saw newspapers that were forced to close. We saw people losing jobs because they were harshly criticizing the government, or because they were part of media that were not following maybe only the government opinion. Also in terms of NGOs, many of them were well, their finances were strengthened and they were under higher supervision in order to kind of prevent them to do their work properly. So that's also something important to say, because all these is undermining also the diversity you can find in the society, and rule of law should be there also to enable all people and all groups representing the society and different parts of the society. So these are things that happened in Hungary in the past years. I would maybe also underline a further point, which was the academic freedom. And potentially some of you already heard the story of the Central European University that used to be in Budapest, and that in the coming year will be based in Vienna, actually, because the government basically, I mean, we can say it in different ways, but basically the government didn't enable the university to function anymore in Hungary, which is a big loss. That's what maybe they don't realize. It's a big loss for Hungarians, because that university had a really big added value to the Hungarian society, to train and form Hungarians and and to bring education and competences as well, indeed. So this is also something we have to underline. And from the European level, at this stage, well, you mentioned the Article 7 procedure. That takes time, and it's a long procedure, and also in the Council, well, often the problem there is that if you take one country and you decide to go further in the process to implement it, that will be a first case scenario that might be the case for other countries as well. So I see it difficult to move on there, because if you do it to Hungary, then it will be Poland, then it will be a third country, and I think head of states are fearing this, and governments are not willing to take that decision. So that's what we see a bit from momentum, and also maybe in terms of rule of law, so the respect of not only minorities but refugees. That was an important topic in Hungary, migration, and actually that was this morning that the Commission might go in front of the Court of Justice, because there is kind of transition zone between Hungary and Serbia, where currently there are still migrants in situations which are not which you should not enable in the EU, and potentially they don't even have food. So this kind of situation also is difficult to help those people if your institutions and the rule of law is not guaranteed in the country. So this is also, I think, something quite important. Maybe a few words on momentum before I give the word. So we were launched with the No Olympia campaign a few years ago. So the goal was to campaign first of all in Budapest. The government had in mind to apply for the Olympic Games, to organize the Olympic Games in Budapest. But many citizens, especially people living in Budapest, think that there are much more other investments to make before organizing Olympic Games. And the whole campaign kicked off and organized the movement, which really was a movement, and still has a lot of movement components before becoming a party, and organized a lot of people were joined this movement against the Olympic Games, and finally the Hungarian authorities withdrew the application. So that was a first success, and then the movement grew up from there. A lot of people joining the movement because they don't feel identified anymore with the way of governing, with the way Hungary is doing at the moment. Often outside of the country you have quite a bad image of what Hungary is doing, or what's happening in Hungary. So a lot of people, and mostly young people, are fed up with the situation, and they want change. So this willingness to change things, and the rule of law is a key topic there, is the basis of the organization. Also, some of the important points are accountability, values, how do we ensure that, for example, European funds that Hungary is receiving is allocated at the right places. We see many cases of corruption, and we tend to say that now we are in a case in Hungary where the whole system, the whole logic of the institutions is basically in another setting. The logic changed, and it's a systemic issue of how all this is managed. So that's kind of things that we want to change. So EU funds, of course, accountability, values. So there, for example, it's interesting maybe to see how at European level we can link the cohesion funds and the funds that are allocated to the respect of certain basic rule of law criteria. I think that's not much asked. Maybe another point which was important for us is we joined a campaign in Hungary where we were collecting signatures to basically Hungary joining the European Public Prosecutor Office initiative. Because of course the Hungarian government did not support that initiative that many other EU countries joined and signed. Well, we clearly see why they would not like that supervision and accountability again. So that's something really important for us. And maybe I will give the floor, but happy to answer to other questions during the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Balint. I think, yes, we will certainly have more questions in the follow-up. But now the main question is then this initiative that you are one of the promoters of, going to be helpful, and in which way for these cases, other cases. And I cannot help thinking that if we had gone to elections in Italy just a few weeks ago, or maybe now, we would probably be in the same situation soon as Hungary is with the Salvini government. So this just to say that I don't think that anybody, any country in Europe is, safe from a situation like we have now in Hungary or Poland, in the European Union, and therefore, I mean, the battles that you're doing are very important to make sure that this remains on the agenda. So tell us a little bit about this initiative,
Yes.
and also about your experience in engaging citizens around it.
Grazie Federica, and thanks to the other party for hosting us, and thank you for being here. Yes, I'm here for a very practical goal, which is to ask you to sign, and not just to sign, but to help in collecting signatures all around Europe on this European citizen initiatives. I read the three main points. It's very simple. To provide the European Union with the general legislation making it possible to verify in an objective manner the practical application of the rule of law in the different member states. Doing so, the mutual trust between the member states will be strengthened and nurtured. Second point, to facilitate the implementation of the provision of Article 7 of the treaty concerning possible breaches of the European Union's values, and to facilitate the enforcement of European laws on judicial cooperation in criminal matters. For example, the European arrest warrant. We have here an expert, who is Emilio De Capitani. Yes, I agree with Federica. It's not just an Hungarian issue or a Polish issue. In reality, the first attempt to activate Article 7 of the European Union was against Italy. And I know it well because I did it in 2002, I think, 2004. Well, I was a member of the European Parliament because of the apparently minor issue, very formal, nothing of substantial. The political parties in Italy were not able to elect the judges of the Constitutional Court for 2.5 years, because the chief of the parties was not able to make an agreement about names. So the court was functioning without, at the beginning was one, and then it was 2 members of the court. And we collected the signatures from 70s or 80s members of the European Parliament. Why we did that? Exactly because it was not torturing people in the street or shooting at the demonstrators. It was just a formal thing. But a formal thing going to the heart of the state, of the rule of law, the Constitutional Court. Well, I know from my experience of 1 week ago how important can be the Constitutional Court in dealing with the rule of law issues. So nobody is exempted from rule of law problems. Nobody. And something very dangerous is happening. If you consider in comparison with 30 years ago, the falling of the Berlin Wall, it was clear, the good and the bad, the good and the evil, democracy and authoritarian states, black and white, was very simple, was very clear. It is no longer like that. The problem is not that democracy is under threat because of the coup d'etat and police rioting in the street and killing everybody. Is about erosion of democracy, which is a much more subtle and insidious and difficult to stop way of make democracy not functioning. And it is exactly because of that erosion that the tools that are foreseen in the treaty are not enough. Because Article 7 of the treaties cannot work for 2 reasons. it has already been said. First reason, no government will be happy to activate the article against another government, and then maybe the next year other government will use it against me. So can you imagine Orban activating Article 7 against Kaczynski, or Kaczynski activating Article 7 against Orban? But not only them, also the other head of government, everybody has some problem. Italy is the most condemned country about the prison system and judicial system before the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So, and the second point is that this is a black or white measure, suspension of the country. This is called a nuclear weapon or a bazooka. So either it's okay, no problem, either I suspend you from the European Union. There is nothing in the between. What is lacking is exactly a mechanism of permanent monitoring, assessing of the situation, reporting, and then saying what is going, well, prison in Italy, the police in France, the border control in Belgium, and there are plenty of issues, very relevant about human rights, that could be pointed out, not just about Hungary and Poland. So, going back to the problem, why democracy is under erosion? This is a big question. There is no a simple, quick answer. Personally, if I have to simplify, I would say, I would talk about two things. One in reality, globalization and technological progress. And maybe even just technological progress is enough, because the relationship between technological progress and globalization is strong. And in that case, we have to consider that the problem as a model, as a systematic model, is not Orban, Kaczynski, or Salvini, or whatever. The problem is China. And why I'm saying that this is China? Again, let's compare it to 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the Soviet Union, very explicitly non-democratic authoritarian regime. What's the difference? The difference is that 50 years ago, the Soviet Union model was unpopular in the Soviet Union. They were trying to listen to Western media and newspapers and the American model, the European model. People from the Eastern Germany wanted to jump the wall to go to democracy. Democracy was a word appealing. It was a system of mass attraction. Now, democracy is not attractive anymore. Even within China, Chinese people are becoming proud of their model, because their model is investing in technology, of course, with huge problem for minorities, for Falun Gong, for Tibetans, for Uyghurs, for a lot of people, but in a general way, using technology and artificial intelligence to provide in the best technological way possible services to the people, to make them rich and to serve their well-being, in a way is working. And even China has a better capacity compared to our European democracy to look to the long run. There are problems, if you think about global warming and all this kind of thing, that the short term of democracy cycle of election, in Italy you vote every 2 months, there is a fundamental electoral campaign. Now is Umbria. So the destiny of our people are depending on what will happen in Umbria. And it's true, because a lot of things can change if one or the other. So Umbria is the center of the war. In 2 months it would be Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany. And every 3 months there is a problem of convince people that this thing is the right thing. Chinese regime doesn't have this problem. So, democracy is no longer popular. If you see statistics of the Pew Center of Human Rights, those that are collecting data worldwide, in Tunisia they had a dictatorship, it was 8 years ago, or even less. So they fought for decades. The women in Tunisia, human rights, exiliates, people arrested, was a big issue for Tunisian people. Now, Tunisia, they don't believe in democracy. Because the delusion from what practically democracy is not able to deliver is huge. Eastern Europe, 20 years ago, they are dying for democracy. They were dying for democracy. They wanted to jump in the European Union just because of the attraction of the democratic system. Now, how come that Orban studied in the Soros? He was a young, not me personally, but the transnational radical party at that time, they knew the young Orban was participating with Pannella and Bonino to the Congress of the Radical Party. Yes, in the Liberal International. So, well, we can also we can just think, oh yes, they are bad. They don't understand how democracy is nice, how democracy is good. They are ignorant, or they do that for. But it would not be a smart answer. There is something deeply not working. In our democratic system. Can Europe do something about it? I think that Europe can do something about it, but we have to upend completely the situation by now is that Europe, the role that Europe is playing, if any role Europe is playing, is a negative one. If you listen to the population, I'm not saying that Europe is not playing also a very positive role in many issues. But if you ask to the people, basically Europe is identified as one more level of erosion of democracy. Because decisions that should belong to us, to the people, are decided through the bureaucracy of Brussels and so on. And even if this is very often propaganda and fake news and false and so on, is also, public opinion is also a fact per se. So it means that something should be done. And I think that the idea that like-minded government, democratic, self-declared democratic government will together bring them together and restore the rule of law and democracy in Europe, I think this is an illusion without a popular push from below. I'm not saying that the European Citizen Initiative on the rule of law is enough, also because European Citizen Initiative is a very weak tool for the European treaties, but is a way, this is why we chose this tool, is a way of trying to say government are not enough, self-declared democratic power are not enough. We need also European citizens working on the dossier. Ursula von der Leyen declared it at the beginning of the mandate very clearly. Global warming, rule of law, social measures, and other very important things. But then, will it be possible concretely making some step forward? I think that without a popular pressure, this will not be possible. Not because of bad faith of anybody, because then even the most pro-European government, I will not make an example, but when you touch their national interests, they remain nationalists. And European political parties, some more and some less. ALDE party for sure is one of the most pro-European parties. But then, when there is a national interest cleavage, the dynamic inside the European Party are not that different than the dynamic inside the Council, the European Council. Because national interest is prevailing. Why? Because electoral systems are national, politics is 99% national, so when big interests are at stake, there is no pressure from below to make a common European or even global interest prevail. So this is why we are not only, Virginia Fiume is coordinating the initiative on this European Citizen Initiative about the rule of law. We are, the initiative is invented by the European movement, so the European Federalists that wrote the text, also Emilio De Capitani, Pier Virgilio D'Astoli, Professor Ponzano and others. There is another initiative on carbon pricing about global warming we are working on, and the idea is to create a Movimento di Iniziativa Popolare Europea, a European movement of citizen initiative, which is called Eumans, so a non-electoral pan-European body to try to push a European reform agenda, not just within the negotiation of national parties and national government, but also directly addressing European citizens. And the rule of law, exactly because it's not a popular thing, it's not a sexy issue, it's difficult to go out and say, we want the rule of law. No, we want money, we want the environment, baby, we want the well-being, but the rule of law, you cannot eat it, you cannot put. So this is why we decided to start from the most difficult part of it, because it's not enough to say democracy, the values, European values, rule of law is abstract, not just theoretical, it's abstract. People are not believing to be wrong, because something very bad happened in national democracy in delivering, in practical terms, results from democracy and rule of law. But anyway, now is the time of involving directly people beyond party barriers and national barriers, because I think that not because of Orban or Kaczynski or Salvini, but because of the massive attraction of the Chinese model, democracy and rule of law are at risk in the world. You see Trump, the United States, for the bad and for the good, the United States and Europe together had for decades, we were a model for people around the world. We are no longer a model. And we were a model also because, not just because of idealistic reason, yes, the rule of law, democracy, but also for economic reason, because United States and Europe for 60s or 70s years were the areas of the world in which there was democracy, rule of law, and economic growth, and scientific progress. Very quickly is no longer like that. We, as Italy, we are investing less than half than China in percentage to the GDP on science and technology. And if you don't invest in science, if you don't invest in research, you don't invest in the future. And in 15 years, 20 years, with artificial intelligence, they are already the top, together with the Americans. In genome editing, Chinese, they are already the top, better than European researchers. So if you lose the race of science and technology, we lose the race of economy, we lose the race of institutional model. This is why we have to do something starting from the potential power of European citizenship. Thank you.
Yeah, difficult one. Huh? I was thinking, you mentioned actually at the end what I was going to say, at the end, at the almost end, what I was thinking, of course, this topic of the rule of law is not something that you can eat or you can touch. And mobilizing people or signatures, and there's several 100,000 that you need to collect is very difficult. So how do we do that? And how do we do that if we don't involve all citizens in a also organized way?
We are starting from scratch. We did not even collect 1,000, so we need 1 million. We are at zero. We are at zero, and we know, for example, for the experience that a lot of human rights organizations around Europe, they have very reasonable argument for not mobilize themselves, because too many signatures and it's not useful, and then the Commission can not listen to you. All very reasonable arguments. So it's a very difficult effort that we are launching. I don't see the alternative. This could sound presuntuoso. What do you say in English? Presumptuous. Okay. But frankly, I think we need a tool to go beyond national party politics and to go directly to the people. And not because, I said before, I repeat it, European Citizen Initiative per se doesn't have any value, because it's just a proposal. And sometimes it's good, because, for example, there was the proposal, the European Citizen Initiative, which collected the most signatures, was one of us. The embryo is one of us. They collected millions of signatures. The European Commission, and I think it was a very good thing, they said, okay, embryo for you is one of us, for us, no. So they stopped the initiative. So the European Commission is not is obliged to reply, is not obliged to do what the 1 million citizens asked for. What is important is what is around it as a mobilization, as a link between organization, political parties, European personalities, initiatives, because maybe while you are collecting signatures, you are helping your Hungarian friend in filing a complaint to European Court, because something has moved. Either the Spanish judge who refused the moratorium because of the judicial system in Poland, who is nominated by the government. So a Spanish judge said from the European Court, there will not be extradition. Sorry if I summarize in a very incorrect way. So there is already something. There is already something, even in the UK. I think while I was a member of the European Parliament, I voted against, for this mail of Emilio, I voted against the European arrest warrant, but I'm a European federalist. Why I voted against? Because we were saying, if you make a European system for the judge to prosecute people, you need a European system of guarantee for the defense. You cannot, you do Europol, Eurojust, the European arrest warrant, and you don't fix a minimum level of guarantee for prisoners, for people under trial. So it's not enough to say I'm pro-European, I'm against European, I'm against Europe. You need to build a federal system where the rule of law is a guarantee for giving more rights to the people, not just to make life easier for government to exchange prisoners, personal data, judicial inquiries, police cooperation, because if not, you participate, you, European Union, participate in that way in the erosion of democracy, because national guarantees are eroded by the transfer of power to a supranational power which does not respect a minimum guarantee of the rule of law. So it's very, to say pro-Europe and anti-Europe in this issue is not enough.
Yes, I'll ask now either if you want to come back or also if somebody wants to ask a question. I think we can start more interactive part. We have about half an hour. So anybody that has a question, just ask first and then you can get back. Burning questions from the floor? No, if not, then you can go ahead for the second.
No, I just want to reinforce what you've said. I think it's very important. First of all, the links and the different initiatives going together. So I think I have the feeling that it's not only a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach, which is essential, where different initiatives needs to come together. But I really would like to re-emphasize the role of local government in that phenomenon. Because if you look at, for example, as human rights cities, it's also a formal commitment from local authorities, and there is more and more about that. If you look at, for example, the UN Council, they just issue a new report on the role of local government in promoting human rights, promoting and protecting human rights. So today is the problem when we see xenophobia, regain of nationalism and discrimination. It's all is related because people feel disconnected. So it's not only that you can have initiative, I mean, to bring people in, it's very important that people understand also what is their rights. And I think one of the fundamental problems we have is that the majority of people, I mean, ordinary people in member states, I mean, we all know what our rights, but exactly as you were saying, when it's about to, I mean, live them and understand exactly what it is and what it means, it's more complicated. So, in this case, local government, they have the right of initiative, and most of them does not use it, because if you look at, as for example, an international instrument of human rights, I mean, who has the responsibility? It's the states, it's them who are signing the convention. But in reality, who is implementing it, who's making it happening in reality on the ground, is the local government. And the local government can use, and if you look at what efficient human rights cities are doing, it's exactly that. They committed themselves to engage, I mean, to respect, to take the human rights fundamental instrument and principle and standard as a normal governance, but with the formal commitment to engage citizens, it means that they have the responsibility and the initiative to explain to the citizen what it is, and as you were saying, it brings again trust, and then it brings trust between the institution and the citizen, and it has also to start with that. People need to have a correct understanding of what it is, and with trust, then you can engage them, and once they are engaged, I think there is different relay, and local government is a strong relay in the process of, you know, joining the bottom-up and the top-down approach. And we have, as for example, in the United States, about climate, the role of the cities, what they've been taking, and we have other examples, the right to food. And if you look today, there is a multitude of networks, there is a multitude of movement from the cities with the engagement that they decide to take one right, so one category of rights, I mean, to fight for that. So I think these initiatives that you are leading, that citizen needs to be on board and to be engaged and to become again responsible, I mean, to take the responsibility to the end and ask for accountability, I think it's really essential that local governments work with it, because another point you were mentioning, which I think is essential, at national level, there is not this connection. Local governments are really close to the people. They are working with the people every day, the service, the municipality. And it's not only a political responsibility, it's also an institutional responsibility to decide to say, what do we do? This is a human rights-based approach that we are applying in every public policy we are doing. And for the rule of law and for the monitoring, this is the last point I would like to do. There is also, you were talking about monitoring and indicators. This is essential. These monitoring and indicators exist. It's just they're not connected and they're not used. If you look at the SDGs, for example, we were discussing before it started, the voluntary local review. SDG. SDG are all linked with human rights. They are all linked with the aspect that relate to the rule of law or the core value of the EU. This instrument exists. Local authorities, if they use it correctly, they can create a framework with the SDG, with human rights indicator, rule of law, the principle of the EU, and they could really promote and have the responsibility, take the responsibility, the initiative and the responsibility to have this monitoring framework in place, to have this indicator that could be coming up and feeding up, as I was saying, bottom-up and top-down approach.
Yeah, we'll be really short. But indeed, I wanted to react to 2 points. First, maybe from Hungary and looking at the transition that came after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a real disappointment of the transition. So Hungarians and the other countries, I think that's a constant in the region. It's kind of a return to Europe, that was expected, and economic crisis and also a lack of political leadership maybe after the fall of the Soviet Union. There was a real disappointment of how it was being inside of the EU. So you have to deal with that as well on the ground, and that's something to take into account for the region maybe. That's something which, from my experience here in Belgium as well, might not be here in the society in the same way. So that's, I think, something to bring on the table. And on Sunday we have local elections in Hungary. There is a big coalition at most of the places against the governing party. Maybe they're on local governments. In the current Hungarian system, it's unfortunately black or white, even if I agree with you that it's never one or two. There are always many possibilities, not pro-European and non-pro-European. But unfortunately, the setting of the system, and that's why I was mentioning the whole logic of the system changed. And at the local government now, and Budapest is an exception because there the opposition is quite strong, maybe stronger even to some extent than the governing party. But in the countryside, the local governments, the local media, everything is basically linked to the central government. Yeah. So basically, this engine of propaganda is so strong that the local mayor is telling what to vote to the people to some extent. And now that the campaign was happening and that even our MEPs were on the ground, half of their week they were talking to people everywhere in the countryside of Hungary. You hear really incredible stories where actually the control is so strong coming from the top that this bottom-up kind of approach is really difficult. But that's our role, we feel, to go there, to talk to the people. Maybe one specific story where when talking to people, some people was telling that, oh, but the migrants are already burning the town which is 20 kilometers away from here. So I have to vote Fidesz, the governing party, in order to survive, because they will come here as well. So that shows you a bit how the propaganda is already working, and I have to agree with you on the model thing, that they basically believe in kind of security principle, and that's what the propaganda is giving them, that you will have security. But that's because they're looking for a model. They're looking for a model, they're looking for a project, they're looking for vision, and that's what we try to understand coming from the people and then propose them in what we propose at local level. And well, we'll have elections on Sunday and let's see how it turns out. But I think it's important to have this in mind, that this model that, especially in Hungary and also at local level, they want to believe.
Is there any questions from this nice crowd?
Well, of course, then you can sign. Annalisa and Jenny there to collect your signature at the table at the bottom.
Exactly. I was just going to ask somebody like Virginia to explain the practicalities where one can sign and all the rest. Would you like to help?
Oh,
Do a little bit of the practical. It was all an excuse.
Fundamental rights. Cool. Yes, welcome everyone. I'm Virginia Fume and I'm the coordinator of Eumans, the project of moving the Constitution. So the European Citizen Initiative can be signed both online and so online we have a dedicated website. It's called allmyrights.eu. It's currently up in English. We are launching translation, and if we have a growing need of translating content, you can help us in other European languages. So you can go to our website now. different rules, so you might be requested to use your ID in the form while you fill it. It's for a good cause, so don't be scared of using your ID card details online. And also we are trying to organize committees in different countries, so we are expanding the network as much as possible. So again, if you have friends that are particularly already active in issues related to human rights or fundamental rights, feel free to connect them with me or us, and we can carry on the campaign together. In Italy, for example, Europa as a political party joined the campaign, and of course our goal is to have a broad spectrum of political parties. To a certain extent, it's not a matter of where we stand in the spectrum, it's more a matter of where the party stands on democratic issues. So if you know, again, MPs, local councillors, just help us to bring this to the streets and to the local institutions. So that's it, and I'm available for questions later. Thank you.
Emilio, maybe you have been drafting the proposal with a lot of discussion today. So maybe if you could explain even the legal value of the rule of law within the system.
Okay. You can also give it a or no, it doesn't work. It works sometimes. You can
Why maybe you don't need it? Maybe you don't.
Okay,
I will tell you, it's very easy. I worked as a Secretary of Civil Liberties Committee in the European Parliament since 1998 to 2011. And most of the energy of the European Parliament was to understand what was happening on the ground. But the information didn't come not by the Commission, and not even by the Council. And notably in domains like police cooperation, judicial cooperation in criminal matters, and so on. And paradoxically, this made the Parliament weak faced to the pressure of the Commission on the Council, for instance, after terrorist attack, in verifying if the reaction was proportionate, necessary, or not. So the big weakness that we have in the European Union is not only a rather lack of transparency at Brussels level, but notably a lack of transparency at national level. To overcome this problem, there is an article in the treaty, which is Article 70, which says that in the specific domain of human mobility, so borders, migration, asylum, human security, cooperation in police matters, and judicial cooperation in criminal matters, there should be an independent, neutral evaluation and mutual verification between the member states, so the peer review, to understand if every member state can be trusted by the others. This mechanism does not work. Currently, the evaluation in this domain is done on a measure we still in the Maastricht era. So the idea was, let's wake up the member states and use something which is already foreseen in the treaty and which has the big added value to associate the Parliament, the European Parliament and the national parliament. Behind this, there is the fact that Commission and Member States should decide for each domain which can be sensible, which kind of information should be collected and compared. Currently is not the case. After 18 years, we are only now collecting the data on, for instance, terrorism-related trail in the Member States. And without knowing what is happening, how can you legislate? So, to make it really short, this proposal tries to create more transparency in the national dimension of European legislation dealing in very sensible domain. This in the interest of the European Parliament, which finally will know what happens, but also in the interest of the member states. And one idea was to have some support also by the civil society. Marco can confirm it. The Civil Liberties Committee took some time a very interesting initiative, not because it knew things, but only because from outside there was someone raising her hand and saying, you have to intervene in this domain. The case of data protection was a classical case, because Commission told us something, the Council told us something, the United States told us something, and then the National Authority of Data Protection told us something different. And at the end of the day we say, why you say this if it's not true? So, in this case, we have been able to have clear information on what was happening, let's say, on the ground. In all the other domains, it's very difficult. Everything should be built from scratch, and you don't know if things are really well implemented. So, the idea of Article 70 is, okay, let's be fair, let's exchange the information, and then do it also under the control of the national parliaments and the European Parliament. To be frank, this is something which is starting working in Schengen, but not yet working in the judicial domain. And if this is the case, a national judge, when he receives a request, for instance, by a Polish judge or by a Hungarian judge, he looks to the text of the regulation. European arrest warrant says that you can refuse to give a person if the member state requiring is under Article 7. So you have only to check if this systemic failure is still present. And we have already several cases. But the problem is also, for instance, in asylum. When Greece was unable to manage all the requests for asylum, first the Human Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, then the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, having verified that the national system was unable to face a request for a fundamental rights, decided to exclude Greece by this kind of obligations. So people remain where they was, even if Greece was the first country of entrance. So bringing transparency, bringing good information can help the institution and also the people. Okay.
Grazie.
I don't know if it was clear, but...
On that case, just to illustrate what you just said, I think this is also one of the priority of the new presidency, Finland, and they want to really to build on this peer review mechanism which has already been initiated between Belgium and Germany on the rule of law specifically, and they want to promote it more.
Good. I think we're closing into our perfect timing towards the Friday evening aperitif. If you're from Europa, Europa is discussing also starting to get involved in promoting this. I think Virginia has been in contact as well, and the topic has been already touched. So I think this is something that also political parties, maybe within even the ALDE family, can cooperate on. And I think it's where, you know, once
Europe is in a very quiet situation.
Now, under the ALDE heads, they will have.
You see how cooperative I am.
Yes.
I'm saying that I'm the most cooperative.
You are the most cooperative, yes. But I think, you know, we don't dislike any signatures from anyone, and I think it's a cause that is very close to the heart of many people that have been working for a big part of their life, also in Europe, but not only, on issue of linked to human rights and linked to the rule of law, and so I think that we will see more of these initiatives. But the signatures are already open, or as we have just heard, we are at 0, so we can only go up.
The site is formyrights.eu. For my rights.
Exactly, and it's absolutely technological, because as Marco has taught me just a few minutes before we started, you can just scan on the flyer code,
I was
And-
bluffing because I'm not able
you
to
don't
do
even
it.
know.
No, I know that this is the purpose of this strange thing, but I would be completely unable.
Very good.
You can also sign on paper at the tables, by the way. Exactly.
From the 40s
All
up,
work is safe,
you are
sure. Exempt from the
exempt.
QR code, yes.
Under 40s, you should know.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much for coming. I think we can stay another
Thank
few
you,
minutes.
Federica.
But you can donate for the campaign if you want.
If you sign, you can have a glass of
You're all
water.
welcome to eat. And so thank you for coming, and see you at the next meeting
Brava, Federica.
on the rule of law.